Thank you, Apnea Worldwide, for this very important occasion today and the release of the journal that is to come up. And well, my topic is relevant. Mostly, there are two keywords, and we are talking about prohibition also, as well as village development, and also mostly in the context of Gandhian thought. And I'm actually trying to bring in this one region, one area which often fails to find enough mention and focus, that is northeast part of this country. And I'll be, my paper that is there in the journal, and I'll be mostly drawing from there, is focusing on some of the experiences and what kind of complexities and contradiction it throws up within the whole discourse of women's movement, as well as the struggle for prohibition, the the whole demand for prohibition. I'll be talking mostly of experiences from Nagaland and Manipur. And it is very interesting that when this paper was written, and in fact when it was submitted, just after that, this whole issue that most of us will be aware of, this whole issue of women's reservation in certain urban bodies that happened in Nagaland, and it finally kind of, snowballed into a much larger controversy, and it has actually almost kind of blasted one, I would call, a myth that was there for a long time. And that is still there, in fact, in many, many ways, that the image of women in Northeast being very liberated and independent and in a relatively much better position. So all those things are now coming out and has been questioned, and a lot of new kind of thinking has started. And my paper was just submitted before, kind of before that all. So in a way, it's interesting to see that the threads of continuation, that is, I was trying to raise a few arguments which I'll be sharing with you today. Well, so when we talk of village development also, I mean, the Gandhian idea of Swaraj and Gram Swaraj, especially village republic, it's very interesting because in Northeast, especially in places like Nagaland and also to some extent Manipur, village has been one central unit. The whole idea of, to the extent that a lot of scholars even would argue that there are traces of this Greek village republic kind of model in certain villages in Nagaland which had their own councils and parliaments and all that. So the idea of village was very central in that always. And it is interesting to see that how women fare in this. And prohibition comes in a very interesting and crucial way in this case. And before actually going into the main arguments, one thing I would like all of us to reflect on is that when we look at women's status and issues of women in the Northeast, I mean, briefly speaking, because we have very less time and it's a very long and large debate, but briefly speaking, one would say that they are actually placed in some kind of multiple marginalization. You can say triple marginalization, because first, of course, they are from a region that has been always seen to be at the periphery, that does not find much focus in the national discourse. Second, of course, as being members of certain communities and tribes which has an overarching identity and which would deny them any kind of separate individual identity, so that overarching kind of community identity is there. And third, of course, the identity of being a woman, which is like a universal kind of marginalization. So this is very essential, this triple kind of marginalization that we have to keep in mind when we talk about women from Northeast. So which kind of sets them apart in some ways from women of the rest of the country, which of course women everywhere go through multiple narratives, but this is a peculiarity that we have to keep in mind. And then I'm going to talk about two organizations today. One of them most of you will be knowing, called Naga Mothers Association, NMA, which has become kind of very, became a very familiar name for many of us in last couple of months because of this reservation issue. And the other organization also many of you would be knowing is called Mera Pebi. That is women torchbearers. Again, most of you would be knowing this organization also because of issue of Iram Sharmila that most of you know about, the one who was fasting, and especially because of the last election results that she got very few votes. In fact, she got 90 votes, and this was seen as a disappointment by many. Right, so these two organizations are the ones that I'll be mostly talking about. And well, so let me straight away come to Manipur and Mera Pebi. Mera Pepis have a legacy of women's, they are contextualized in a long-running legacy, and some of us who are kind of familiar with Manipur would know that they have these two Nupilan. Nupilan means women's war. One in 1904 and one is 1929, when the Manipur women kind of taken lead in the struggle against the colonial power that time, and it was around issues of price rise. When the government that time, the British government, wanted to raise the tax in rice, the rice price, rice being a staple diet, it were the women of the society who had taken a leading role in organizing these two very central kind of movements, and they are we can know from the word that they are seen as war. The literal translation is women's war, Nupilan. So these two are very key events in Manipur history. And also there are a lot of other small markers that you can see, like there are this market, most of us who have been to Imphal would have seen it's become a landmark for the city, this women's market called Ima Kaithal, that is women's market, that is a market run by women, traders are women, and in fact the suppliers, like it's a whole chain of kind of commercial chain that is there. So there are a lot of markers that shows that women have been always having certain kind of key function in the way this social mobilization as well as different issue happens. But when we come to prohibition in a kind of specific way, there is one key kind of event that happens in 1970s. It's called Nishabandi movement, or movement against prohibition of abuse. So this happens with 70s when Manipur gains statehood from Union territory, it becomes a state. There was a peculiar situation where you see that there was statistics that is available that talks about when the population was around 20 lakhs, the liquor shops were more than 70, and there were like unaccountable number of illegal liquor shops and houses, and kind of lot of warehouses. So you can see that alcohol abuse was very prevalent. And again, there are a lot of studies that shows how women mostly feel the brunt of this abuse in terms of domestic violence and other kind of crimes that kind of it leads to. So there are these women's group who organize themselves in kind of doing some kind of raids in this illegal kind of shops, trying to organize night vigil, kind of this kind of vigilante kind of groups that will go around the neighborhood and trying to kind of spot somebody who will be drunk and then, take some kind of communal, community kind of policing kind of things. And I will come to the problems of it later, but I'm just giving you the broad outline now. So all that happens in 70s. And in 1975, in Kakching area, there was a committee formed, which is like the forerunner of this Mera Pebis later in 1975. And all Manipur women, social reformation and development and Samaj, that was kind of established in 75, which would later on become kind of the main body of Mera Pebi. Now, this is where something very interesting happens around same time, and that is what I think brings out the whole interconnections, that whole issue of, that women's movements have been globally talking about this whole idea of intersectionality. So you can see in Manipur that happens in a very interesting way. In 70s also is the time where that infamous Armed Forces Special Powers Act, so which some of us knows as AFSPA, right? Most of us know that Manipur has been one state that has been constantly talking about AFSPA. It is an act that gives the army some kind of unprecedented power to kind of bypass the civil authority completely and even issue kind of shoot at sight warrant without kind of any involvement of civil kind of authorities and civil bodies, and has been widely seen as some kind of a law that has been widely seen to be anti-democratic and kind of outside the democratic frame. So that act in 80s takes a very kind of strong turn in Manipur, and this there have been frequent cases around 80s, 70s and 80s where people would be frequently picked up on the suspicion of being some member of one of the insurgent groups, and some of them will never be returned. So there are a lot of issues like that. And in 70s, one incident where someone called Ibom Shah was arrested in Manipur in 1980s by the army, was picked up suspected to be a militant. And this Nishabandi women, who were at that time organized as Women Against Prohibition, they took out one rally in the night time with torches. So, and they went to the police station, they marched to the army camp, not police station, army camp, and they kind of forced the army to hand him over because there was no evidence or anything. So the army was forced to, and the local army and police was forced to hand him over to the women. So that was a very significant kind of turning point, because that is how the image of these women as torch bearers, that became very important. And the Mera Pepe became a very crucial, a very significant name in these narratives. So that was one key event, and they were formed in state level, district level, and Deka, that is the community or the locality level. So at 3 levels they're organized, and it's very important to know that their terminology, like they are also, every Meitei women are seen as a Mera Baby in a crisis situation is supposed to be transformed into a Mera Baby. So this is, again, you can see the whole projection is very nationalistic, that you are by default for being a Meitei, that is the dominant, like that's the main community in Manipur, you are seen to become automatically a Mera Baby when a crisis happens. So it is a very nationalistic kind of a framework that is there. So that happens, and another crucial event is that how actually things are merging. You can see that there are a lot of allegations. In fact, there are some studies and documentation that shows that there are a lot of allegations that the local administration, including the police and paramilitary, including the Indian army, is actually involved in lots of kind of alcohol and drugs dealings across border, Myanmar border, because Manipur is at the border of Myanmar. So Mera Babies have started doing these raids on this, even the military trucks and army trucks, to expose this kind of sinister kind of linkages. So that also brings them at a kind of, at a confrontation with the state discourse again. So all this thing, by all these ones, the Mera Babies actually has brought this discourse to the forefront. And there are studies that the critique part I'll come later, but let's look at the parallel event or parallel development in Nagaland. That is the Naga Mothers Association. And NMA is formed in Kohima in 1984, and as people have pointed out, NMA happens to be the only organization, only women's organization, and I think there will be parallel in Latin America, in fact, in recent times, especially in Chiapas and all these places. But the NMA otherwise is one of the few women's organizations which is actively recognized as one of the party to the ceasefire. So they have been party to Government of India and National Socialist Council of Nagalim, NSCNIM. They have been one party to the ceasefire. And that again brings in the whole idea of the way, the whole issue of the figure of the mother that has been brought into the light, and NMA in their documents talk about that how it is the mother who suffers the most, and it is the mother who can understand the damage that the problem and alcoholism and drug addiction can cause to the family and eventually the society. So therefore, there again you see that how NMA also starts from alcohol and abuse, same as Mera Babies. Both the organization starts from alcohol and drugs, but then they transcends into larger kind of social issues, and you can see the connections there. And NMA was the instrumental in 1994 when Nagaland was declared a dry state through the NMA and the Baptist Church. They were working together, and they passed this act of Prohibition, Total Liquor Prohibition Act in 1994. Well, I will skip the details because we have less time. But what would be important is to see the emerging paradoxes in this case. Let's focus there now. Because in both NMA and Mera Baby, the whole idea is that they are drawing from the social sanction. They have posited themselves as organization that draws from the social capital that women has. And the moment they try to actually step beyond it, as the example of NMA shows, and also the case of Sharmila is very interesting. It shows that how the society in a way has actually withdrawn from there. I mean, they have withdrawn their support from there. So NMA is the paradox is very important to know that you are allowed, they are accepted and in fact encouraged to be arbiters of peace or as to be the votary of their community rights. But moment they start questioning these very parameters of these community rights or these identities, then you can see the social sanction actually is very significantly withdrawn. So, and within NMA also and Mera Baby's example, there are a lot of examples when you talk to women involved in this, there are a lot of contradiction within themselves because these organizations also in a way represents this whole complex that is there within most of the ethnic organization, that is between the push of modernity and pull of tradition. Because most of these organizations are, although they represent their tradition, they also had a modernist kind of streak, that they want to do reformism. And as you know, liquor is essential part and parcel of most of the tribal communities, right? It was not seen as a taboo for a long, long time. Even now, there are debates within these organizations whether total prohibition is actually acceptable or not. And one example, you can see Hornbill Festival that most of you will be knowing that happens in Nagaland in December. There is a debate now whether, because there are sections that talk about total prohibition and drinking is against the Christian norms, and others who would say that drinking is one essential, liquor is an essential mark of one's indigenous identity. So this debate is very much there. And the same way, again, you can see how even in the case of this Mera Baby is going down around and breaking the illegal shops. Again, the question is that who are the people who are running these liquor shops? Many of the time, these are the poor people from the same communities who are doing these illegal liquor shops. So again, this whole contradiction is there, and they are again have this moral dilemma there, because some of the activists have to go and break down their shops to realize that it would be a shop run by their own aunts or somebody who are doing it for different economic hardships. So this whole dilemma is also there. And the whole idea of social capital. Now, Iram Sharmila is quite an example that there are a lot of other issues that came up. That one, of course, that she was kind of taking a decision which was not consulted with the community, but also equally, some way it was also there that she is seen to have betrayed their community because she has entered into a relationship with somebody who is not from the community. So you can see that whole kind of that community control is very much there. So this women's organization have created a political space for themselves, but now that space is coming into clash with the dominant narratives of community. So how do they negotiate it? So that is the kind of next phase that they have reached now. And MMA is a very fine example of that. And how they have tried to push the boundary, but they have now still kind of faced with some dilemma. So many women have organized themselves into collectives and have adopted gendered frames through which they have articulated their resistance and efforts for peace. These spaces not only allow them to challenge their limitation, but also to explore their sense of agency. So the sense of agency is, I think, a very crucial thing, that there are limitations, but that has been explored. But the abiding contribution of these two organizations, I think, would be to place the issue of women in Northeast within the discourse of we call it transnational human rights discourse. That women's issues are not only women's issue within their particular community, but it's part of a larger human rights discourse. So that is what has been kind of pushed by this organization. They have tried to push for this. And there are different ways to look at it, but one is that there are social movement organizations very much, and they have tried to redefine the community boundaries. So I will just end by a small poem that I had written when this NMA issue had come, and it had come out with one newspaper in Nagaland called Morong Express. And I call it Footnotes to His Story, Fleeting and Peripheral. It's a short one, it goes like this. Her shoulders, sometimes frail, sometimes firm, carries the burden of a history and its thousand contradiction. Her being she herself, consumed by what they call as claims of customs and traditions. The fields, the mountains, they change colors, and she paints each season with odes of tears and resistance that tries to make sense of traditions, framed in his stories, to which her stories are passing footnotes, condemned, coerced, to be subtext, peripheral, and ephemeral. Thank you.